Keir Cutler has quite a high profile on the internet. He's got a little point of 1 to 10 why William Shakespeare couldn't have written William Shakespeare. And this is a little commentary on that. So let's go through the points one at a time. The first one is that there are no manuscripts or diaries or letters belonging to William Shakespeare. Let's take manuscripts first. There's an excellent paper called The Survival of Manuscripts. They're putting a link up on your screen. What they say in that paper is, which is quite graphic, just answers the point straight away really. No manuscript of any play has survived in the autograph of Kidd, Green, Johnson, Chapman, Dekker, Heywood, Marston, Webster, Beaumont, Fletcher or Ford, to name only the better known dramatist. The facts can be summarised this way. No play by any professional playwright which was successful on the stage and which was printed before 1642 is known to have come to our time. So in Shakespeare's days, actually, added to that the fact that it's very unusual for manuscripts to survive anyway. But in Shakespeare's case, as you'll be aware, there are particular reasons why such manuscripts and records don't exist. Firstly, the Globe burnt to the ground in 1613, and manuscripts of the scribal copies and prompt copies, together with records of payments and receipts, would have been kept by the theatre company. The manuscripts have been commissioned by the theatre company, and therefore belong to them. So if in this fire, any documents kept at the theatre would pretty well certainly have been completely destroyed. But there's more. All surviving fragments were needed soon after Shakespeare's death because the actors Hemmings and Condell were collecting together everything that was available to compile the first folio. So once the folio was printed and there was a nice neat book, why in God's name would anyone want a pile of inky papers? They probably didn't even bother to collect them from the printer. But okay, what if Hemmings and Condell kept them for sentimental reasons? Well, as it happens, the two actors must have stayed friends because they're both buried in the parish of St Mary Aldermanbury, and the entire parish was completely destroyed by fire in 1666. In short, the fact that there are few documents relating to Shakespeare is staggeringly unsurprising. Just to take diaries, again, very few exist. It wasn't a very common practice to keep a personal diary in those days. There were journals, like the one kept by Shakespeare's son-in-law, John Hall, but that was a medical journal. He does mention the names of the patients, but only insofar as they're relevant to the treatment. Diaries are much more unusual, personal diaries, and only 20 survive from the entire 16th century. So just to say that again, just to emphasise, in 100 years of history from 1500 to 1600, there are 20 surviving diaries for the whole of England. And letters are, again, if Shakespeare wrote any letters, clearly they would have gone somewhere else. This barely needs spelling out. So what would the recipient have done with those letters? Well, the paper was valuable. You didn't really keep letters. There was no real value in them, so why keep them? You would use them to, first of all, to scrape the ink off. You could just use them again. People did that. You could use them for wrapping fish, lining baking trays, starting fires, or you could sell them to printers. There was a value in them, in bulk. You could sell them to a printer. They were used by printers for laminated to make in the bookbinding process. So it is staggeringly unsurprising that there are no diaries or letters or manuscripts for Shakespeare. The second thing he mentions is no manuscripts were mentioned in the will. Let's be clear. Manuscripts had zero value. They were worth nothing. You could not take a manuscript to some early modern version of Sotheby's and sell it for 1,000,000 groats. So obviously they had no value. So Shakespeare doesn't mention manuscripts in his will, nor does he mention the contents of his privy or the items piled on his dunghill, both of which would have been at least as valuable as any manuscript that happened to be knocking about. We come then to point number 3, which is a related topic, which is the fact that Shakespeare didn't leave any books behind. Well, there are no books mentioned in the will, but then in the will there are no piss pots, bed hangings, chairs, extra beds apart from the second best bed, no brewing equipment, which everybody possessed in those days, no drinking vessels, no plates, I don't think I need to know fire irons. Those were also listed in a lot of inventories of the time. None of these chattels are mentioned. So either there was a separate inventory, or it was just assumed that all the minor items like that, they weren't all that minor actually, a bed was worth a lot of money then. But all that sort of thing was just included in the house and would have gone to John Hall and Shakespeare's daughter. Let's mention that theatre companies might well have bought some useful books for professional use, so that they might have belonged to the theatre company anyway, and writers might have left them at the Globe because that's where they did their work, so that's where they would have used them. And obviously anything left at the Globe, again in 1613, would have been destroyed. But let's assume that Shakespeare had some books at his home. Okay, after his death, they would have gone with all the other chattels to his son and daughter-in-law to the posh house in Stratford, and then they would have been, somebody dies, usual story, there's an auction, any books of no value would have been thrown away, and assuming that some books still survived, well, how exactly would we know that they had once belonged to Shakespeare? His name written on a flyleaf? That doesn't seem to have been a common practice then. For all we know, we might have some of Shakespeare's books somewhere, but how the hell would we know? This is a non-point. Fourth one, again, we're on well-trodden ground here. There are no school records. Well, there are virtually no school records at the time for anywhere, except, we know there's few exceptions. Winchester's quite good for keeping records, but Winchester and Westminster School have records, but few others. Certainly none at Stratford, none at all. It's not just Shakespeare who's not recorded as being there. Nobody at Stratford Grammar School is recorded. When you think about it, this is, again, staggeringly unsurprising. Once the pupils left long ago or even died, why on earth would you hang on to the records? But let's just take one example where we just have to make this leap. Not Shakespeare, but Thomas Wolsey. He lived in Ipswich as a child and probably went to school at the grammar school in his hometown. But guess what? There are no records. However, he did go to university. If he hadn't gone to university, he couldn't have got any further, could he? So we simply have to make the guess that he had been to the school in Ipswich. And it's a very, very good guess. A very, very good guess. If he hadn't gone to the school, he couldn't possibly have gone to university. Then he couldn't have become cardinal and ultimately Chief Minister of England. But according to Keir's logic, no record means he didn't go to school. According to his logic, the man known as Thomas Wolsey was an imposter, acting as a front man. Or, to put it another way, there's no record that William Shakespeare ever defecated. Not a single product of the bardal backside is now extant. If there was, it'd probably be on view in a glass case in the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust Museum. But by this logic, used by Keir Cutler, that means that Shakespeare did not digest food in the natural way, but disposed of bodily waste by, I don't know, some kind of poop teleportation device. So that's the logic of no records equals didn't happen. No documents identifying him as a writer. Let's be clear, there are many documents identifying Shakespeare as a writer. His name's on all the books and the dedications. There are commentators who mention his name and annotations in the margins of other books. And there are many elegies written unmistakably to the man. The Rebels list for 1604 of the court entertainment for that year identifies him as the author of several of the canonical plays, but deniers, in the face of this, simply pull out the get-out-of-jail-free card. Oh, it says Shakespeare, according to them, but it means Marlowe, Oxford, Bacon, Neville, Queen Elizabeth, the Bloody First, Old Uncle Tom Cobley and all. The get-out-of-jail-free card means that no document can be referred to as belonging to Shakespeare. They have rendered impossible to identify a document referring to Shakespeare except, rather wonderfully, Ben Jonson, in a memoir, unambiguously identified Shakespeare as writer. And let's be clear, he can't possibly be referring to any of the candidates, and Marlowe or Bacon or the Earl of Oxford. He identifies the author as sloppy and rather ignorant, but he also allows that he was hugely talented. Please excuse me for reading in full. It is honestly a rather beautiful testimony to male friendship, which coming from badass Ben Jonson seems all the more touching and sincere. And it goes like this. I remember the players often mentioned it as an honour to Shakespeare that in his writing whatsoever he penned, he never blotted out a line. My answer has been, would he had blotted 1,000? which they thought a malevolent speech. I had not told posterity this, but for their ignorance who chose that circumstance to commend their friend, by wherein he most faulted, and to justify mine own candour, for I loved the man, and to honour his memory this side idolatry as much as any. He was indeed honest, and of an open and free nature. He had an excellent fancy, brave notions, and gentle expressions, wherein he flowed with that facility that sometimes it was necessary he should be stopped. Sufflaminandus erat, as Augustus said of Haterius. His wit was in his own power. Would the rule of it have been so too? Many times he fell into those things, could not escape laughter, as when he said in the person of Caesar, one speaking to him, "Caesar, thou dost me wrong." He replied, "Caesar did never do wrong but with just cause," and such like, which were ridiculous. But he redeemed his vices with his virtues. There was ever more in him to be praised than to be pardoned. Now, it's just a wonderful example of male friendship which survives to this day, this characteristic of you don't just praise, you don't just love, you take the piss. And that to me is the smack of authenticity in this little account from Johnson. Now it's well documented that Ben Jonson knew the actor from Stratford. He's actually mentioned in his printed plays as an actor in one of his plays. So this is reliable testimony from a first-hand witness. If playwriting were a capital crime, then will Shakespeare be condemned to the gallows? Which is case closed, actually. But let's move on. The sixth point, I have to confess, I'm just completely puzzled by. Keir mentions Queen Elizabeth and says that Queen Elizabeth never knew Shakespeare and he never knew Queen Elizabeth. I don't know why he thinks this is a point, honestly. In what weird dimension does this have any bearing on the issue of whether Shakespeare wrote the plays? I just don't know. But as it happens, it's probably wrong, because on the title pages of Love's Labour's Lost and Merry Wives of Windsor, there is a boast that the plays were performed for the Queen. So the probability is that Shakespeare was at least in the same room as the Queen on both occasions and may well have been performing in the plays himself. I know it's tough doing this kind of research. After all, this information is only available to that tiny band of people who have an internet connection and a minimum of one finger to type with. The fact is, he's wrong. Just provably wrong. It's very likely that they at least had some brief conversation or that she would have known of him. It was a fatuous point to make in the first place. It makes no difference whether Shakespeare knew Queen Elizabeth or absolutely none. But over and above that, he's failed to check up on the facts and he's wrong. Okay, next point. I got a bit overexcited there. The spelling of the name. We're back on well-trodden ground here. Seriously, there are lots of examples at the time of people's names being spelled in a different way. I know it's surprising to us, but it's very common then. I could give you lots of examples, but Christopher Marlowe is great because he belonged to the same milieu, he's from the same social background and moved in the same circles as Shakespeare. And here's what the Oxford Dictionary of National Bibliography says about the spelling of Marlowe's name. The spelling of the family name was fluid. John Marlowe was often called Marley and sometimes Marl, while Christopher appears as Marlowe, Marlowe or Marla on his title pages. Marley in his only extant signature, Marlin or Merling in Cambridge University records, and Morley in the coroner's inquest on his death. You'll find this on the Oxford BNB and the link is on your screen right now. The next point is, this is a bit more unusual one. Full marks for originality on this. The next point is that Shakespeare was never arrested, to our knowledge, and that seemed for him. That seems to be the mark of a playwright for Keir Cutler, that they would be arrested. And it's true that some playwrights did get into trouble and were arrested. Writing was a dangerous occupation at the time, and many people fell foul of the Queen's wrath. And Mr. Cutler begins with Johnson, and Johnson was famously irascible. He killed a man in a duel. He did get off, but his thumb was branded with a T, meaning that if he committed a similar offence, that would mean Tyburn, the gallows. So it's hardly surprising that this irascible man got in trouble with the authorities. But on top of that, both he and Nash wrote a play called The Isle of Dogs, which it doesn't exist anymore, so we can't confirm this, but it's said to have satirised the Queen. If you satirise a queen who had someone's hand cut off for tentatively suggesting that she shouldn't marry a Frenchman, then of course you're going to be in trouble. And getting on to Marlowe, as Mr. Cutler well knows, Marlowe was not arrested for writing plays. He was a spy and was mostly in trouble for an alleged plot to coin money, which was a capital offence. Also, he was a self-confessed pederast, also a capital offence, and an atheist, which could get you in deep trouble. If you desperately wanted to get into serious trouble with the authorities, then Marlowe had ticked every box and then drawn some extra boxes so he could tick them as well. Playwriting was not the problem. Okay, now we get, again, a nice well-trodden path. We're on the so-called encyclopedic knowledge displayed in the plays. And people do say this. They say that he must have been a doctor, a lawyer, philosopher, military commander, master mariner. So I've come across this a lot, so I always ask them, okay, which act, which scene, which lines are you talking about? And I swear I have never had a sensible answer. Not one. In Keir's case, he referred me to the books of two long-dead old buffers, Major General Snottington Snitley and Rear Admiral Snittington Snotley. No, I said. You say he was an expert at all this, so which act, which scene, which line? I'm still waiting. But please, anyone, if you can think of a scene in which the writer of the Shakespeare canon displays an astonishing level of knowledge of something, well, let me know. Act, scene, line, not a reference to a long-dead brigadier. Now, the 10th point is even more mystifying than the one about the Queen. Stratford makes money out of tourism. Yes, it does. I honestly think that Keir has decided that he needed 10 points, but he'd run out of ideas. Stratford does indeed make money out of tourism. He implies a massive deep state QAnon conspiracy with Stanley Wells as the devious man-lizard person directing operations from a secret bunker underneath the Shakespeare Centre. Well, this is not really worth talking about now, is it? And that about wraps it up. Honestly, if you can't think of any points that counteract what I'm saying, by all means, please put them in the comments column. And if you have been, thanks for listening.